everybody. I hope you're going to enjoy this. When we did it for Grandpa, I contradicted him all the time. Let's see if he's going to contradict me.
So we have a few questions for you, Bubba, that an email was sent out to all of your children and grandchildren, and everyone contributed their favorite questions to ask you. And I think we'll start today with some icebreakers. So the first question on my list is, what was the worst experience of your life?
Well, you know, we have to expect certain things like death, and I suppose the worst experiences is losing people that I love, you know, from my family and my friends. But actually, believe it or not, the worst experience is the one I'm having right now with this tendinitis or plantar fasciitis, whatever, because it just doesn't stop. Today is 6 weeks, and I've had enough of it.
Your whole life, that's the worst experience?
Would you believe that? It may be because God is good to us. We get older and we forget. So maybe after this is over, I'll probably say, gee, I should have said something else. But right now, I'm living in this.
Okay. So the second question is, what was the best experience of your life?
It can't be one. I mean, I loved going to school. I loved getting married. I loved having children. I loved giving concerts. It's hard to put that because each one has a special meaning for me.
Grandpa was giving you a look.
I've had a lot of good experience.
Grandpa was giving you a look as if you were leaving him out.
Grandpa?
Was giving you a look.
Because he doesn't understand what I'm saying. I'm speaking Lapland.
All right. What was the worst thing you did?
The worst thing I did? Oh, well, I don't know. Because there were many bad things I did. I don't know. Let's go on.
All right. We'll skip that. What was the stupidest thing you've ever done?
Oh, I've done so many stupid things. To pick out the stupidest, I don't know.
So the top three.
The stupidest thing is being unkind to Grandpa. That was kind of stupid. That's definitely...
No, that would be the worst thing you've done, not the stupidest thing you've done.
You know, unkind, because he's been so good to me, you know. I regret that. But stupid, I think as I get older, I do more stupid things, like put things in the wrong place. I think one of the stupidest things is accusing people of doing things they haven't done.
Do you have an example that you can give us?
Yeah, well, just today, thinking that the kids had gotten into my jewelry case, and actually I had just put it in another spot. That's why.
All right, so what thing do you regret the most? What do you regret the most?
You know, I think it was, and it comes under the head of stupidity also. I was afraid to take the Regents exam, which would have given me maybe a couple $100 to make it easier for my parents when I went to college, because I didn't think I could make it. And then when I got to college and I saw the people who did take it and, you know, and got I felt stupid because I really should have taken it. I was afraid. I guess that's it. Being afraid to fail is a stupid thing.
What's the best thing you did?
Married, Grandpa. That's easy. That's easy. And he's sneezing on the truth.
All right.
But of course, now that he's sneezing, you got to expect 50 more. He can't sneeze 2 sneezes.
So the next questions are the saddest thing, the happiest moment of your life, the most frightening thing, and the most exciting thing.
Oh, wow. Well,
you can pick one.
If I think about it, I think the saddest thing for me, I get for losing my grandmother. Even all these many, many years since, I still have that pain that I felt in losing her. The happiest, I guess the happiest was having my children, my grandchildren, my family. That I'm always happy about. That is exciting to think about going to visit them, going to see them. I love that feeling I get. It can't be explained or described. I mean, looking at this one's face, oh, that excites me. I love it. And so when I'm home, all I can do is close my eyes and remember what he looked like. You know, that makes me feel good.
What was the most frightening thing?
Well, the most frightening thing have been when we've gone on car trips with Grandpa and he's gotten lost. You know, I don't like that. There's another frightening thing. I don't enjoy getting lost. I'm not at my best, speaking of stupidity.
Can you tell us a particular story?
Well, you know, it happened many times, no matter how many times we went out to Long Island. Grandpa always thought that New York was west, so we'd always end up at the end of Long Island instead of the other way.
So what was the most delicious thing you've eaten?
That I've ever eaten? Oh, Mama's food.
And the most disgusting thing?
She's lying.
I don't remember eating anything. Oh, you want me to say it?
Yes.
Indian food. There's something in there. It's not just the cilantro. It's something in there that makes me shiver.
We're going to have to make her some curried something.
So as you look back over your life, do you see any turning points? That is, a key event or experience that changed over the course of your life or set you on a different track?
Well, yeah, there have been. Every time I've moved, it's been opening a new door. I think when I went back to study music and, concertized, that was another step. Right now, I'm in another chapter of my life with the two of us aging and parts of our body deteriorating. It's another phase of my life. But I'm very happy to be here.
If you could relive any day of your life, what day would that be?
Well, that's tough to say, because I think everything happened the way it was supposed to. Even thinking that I could have done things better, I'm glad for the way it worked out, because I've always felt that God was with me and that things happened even if I wasn't happy about them, but things happened the way He wanted it to, and will continue to be that way, whatever God wills.
So the next question is, what would you say you know now about living a happy and successful life that you didn't know when you were 20?
I think being more patient. I would have been more patient, and always tried to be kind, but I would have wanted to be even more sensitive and kinder and more giving. That's what I would have liked. There's never enough.
What accomplishment are you most proud of?
I don't know whether I should take credit for it, but I love the way my children individually turned out and how they have been with their children. It's not my accomplishment, though. I'm just here to enjoy it. But I guess in teaching Yiddish, I have a great deal of satisfaction in watching people learn and becoming, more comfortable with it and enjoying it the way I do. It gives me a great deal of pleasure. And also, but I always had to keep a level head. I remember when I told Papa, my father, that I sang at shul and everybody enjoyed it, and Papa smiled and said, "Did you let yourself go?" And I said, "Papa, I could never have a swelled head with you."
Okay, and the last question for this section is, if you were going to write a book, what would you call it, and what would it be about?
The foibles of Gloria, Goldie, Block.
The book doesn't have to be about you. It could be any book.
I don't know. It would have to have God in it, I know that. It's interesting. I was very much influenced by growing up in a family where, at least, my uncles, my grandparents, I was very fortunate. I had all 4 grandparents. First one died when I was 17. I saw them every week of my life. And that, the support and the love that I got from all of them meant a great deal in the way I developed. So I'm very grateful for that. What was the question again?
So if you were going to write a book,
Yeah.
what would you call it, and what would it be about?
Oh, I did say the foibles of, because I think it would be more interesting to read if you read about the mistakes I made along the way.
So, will you write the book?
The mistakes of Goldie Block.
You should. Yeah, it would be interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, Stephen's bar mitzvah, of course, that was in an Orthodox shul, and the men and women sat separately. But Brian was only, I think, maybe 3 or 3.5 years old, and so he was sitting with the women. And on a Saturday service, it's at least 3 hours, and the kid was getting tired, I guess. And he's starting to talk, and I'm saying, "Shh, shh, you have to be quiet." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because you're Jewish." And in a loud voice, he yells out, "I don't want to be Jewish." And I had to grab him and run out of the shul, the back of the shul. I was so embarrassed because there was no way, people didn't hear. They heard, "I don't want to be Jewish." That was the first embarrassing one. The other one also involved Brian, because we were in San Francisco and we're sitting in this kosher-style restaurant. And when we were ready to leave, Brian always wanted to be at the head of everything, and he was sitting behind. So to take a shortcut to get in front of us, he went under the table of a gentleman who was sitting there eating a plate of beet borscht. And they came up under the guy's feet, and the red borscht went all over his clothes, and I was so panicked. Instead of just apologizing and saying I would pay for it, I ran out of the restaurant, and it was on one of those hills of San Francisco. And with Stephen and Elliot, we were the 3, because I was so afraid. I was wearing a red coat. I knew they would find me. And Grandpa paid the bill. He didn't even realize what was going on. He sees us up at the top, and we didn't go out that night because I was afraid that the guy would find me with the red coat and accuse me. It was so foolish of me, it's true, but I was so overcome. That was my other embarrassing story.
She ran so fast it took me 2 blocks to catch up to her.
Oh my, those days I could run. And I probably even had heels on. That's another embarrassing.
Well, we're going to move on to the next section. And the next section is about your family life, but the early family life.
Yeah.
So I guess what we're looking at are your ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember any stories about how your ancestors, either your father's or your mother's side of the family, came to America?
Oh, sure, because actually my grandfather that my father's father came. His intent was to get some work, save up money, and go back with the money to Europe, to Poland, where they came from. And he left my grandmother.
So
with
he wasn't thinking he was going to immigrate. He was going to stay in Poland. His hope was to stay in Poland?
No, yes, to come back to Poland.
Just to make enough money.
Yeah,
and
make
go back
enough
home.
money. So they had 5 children, and my great-grandmother lived with them. What happened was he got caught by the First World War and was not able to get back and was not able to have any contact with them in terms of writing them or what. So my grandmother made some money by selling coffee and rolls down at the railroad station. And my father was the oldest child, and he went to help. He was about 10 years old. And when the train came in, they would sell coffee and rolls. Also, sometimes she would sell chickens. And something that she sold was like black market. And, so they once caught her, and my grandmother went to jail, but she was taken, they released her right away, But they used to have to walk. I heard many stories about how they had no vehicle to take them. They would walk down to the station. That was at least must have been even more than a mile each way. A side story, but one day they were coming back, and it was in the winter time, and it was dark, and they had to go past a cemetery. And it was one of those, but a Christian cemetery. It was one of those nights when they go, as part of their tradition, to the graves, and they have candles. So here they are, that they come around the cemetery, and all they see are these lights coming toward them, and it was so frightened. But that's the story my father told. Well, anyway, the point was, when the war was over, my grandfather wrote, or he had somebody write for him, my grandmother, that he wanted to come back. He had saved up money. He did shoe repair, and he was going to come back. And my grandmother wrote him back, if you want to come here, you can come here. But the children and I and my mother are coming to America. And actually, she saved our lives that way, because we would have been caught up in that Holocaust. So that much I know about them. I don't know on my mother's side much about their trek, except that my grandmother had 5 of her 6 children there in Europe, and she came here. It was an arranged marriage. And I had the opportunity of seeing 2 different, they were all Orthodox, but 2 different styles of living, On the one hand, there was the arranged marriage, which in this case was very dutiful, and, but there wasn't much affection. My father's side, there was full of love and joy and, love for each other. And I think it had an effect on me to see that. Who is this doll? Is this poop?
Was Zaida's marriage also arranged, though? But that
No,
was a love.
this wasn't arranged. They had an interesting story. Actually, when they were kids, my grandparents, their parents, who were a widow and widower, got married. But my grandmother had to divorce him again because the boys used to beat up her girls. He had boys and she had the girls. And so they got divorced again. The irony is that one of those boys grew up to marry my grandmother, and they were very loving, devoted. My father always commented, you believe that? He used to beat her up. And they became really inseparable once, they got back together. It's a happy story there.
Do you know the meaning of your family name? I guess that would be Fuchs. What does Fuchs mean?
Just a little louder.
Do you know the meaning of your family name?
Fox.
Yeah, Fox. Are there
Because when they were giving out names, if you could afford it, you could pay for a fancy name. If not, the poor people, they just gave them names of animals. That's why you have Hunt and, you know,
who gave them the names? Where did they get the names from?
oh, the town. Yeah,
Oh.
in the town they gave them, they assigned them names, and ours was Fuchs, which is fox in German. I don't Polish.
Can you tell a story about either your grandmother or grandfather that would characterize him or her? Perhaps something he or she did, or the way he or she reacted, or something that happened to him or some member of the family?
Well, I can tell you that people came from the area, the little village where they came from, which my father referred to as a mud hole, and they always came with a piece of paper in their hand from when they came from Ellis Island, and on that paper was my grandfather's name and address. That was the first stop in New York. They went to my grandfather, who had a shoe repair shop. They went there, and then he would greet them and then send them around the corner to the tenement house where my grandmother always had something for them to eat and to make them feel welcome. And that made me feel good. The house was never empty. There was always somebody there.
Give us the name and the personality of each of your grandparents.
Okay, so let's say my mother's mother, Esther, was a very, she was wonderful to me, absolutely wonderful. I would characterize her as being loving, but she and my grandfather, it was very observant, very religious. He was certainly kind to me, but he was kind of harsh to his children, you know, very, very restrictive, you know. But he was nice to me.
Now, was he the shoemaker, or it's the other side?
My mother's father. And her mother did all kinds of work like janitress or helping a caterer and all to make extra money, because that grandfather was a tailor. And whatever he made, the top of it went to the rabbi. And then he gave my grandmother money for the 6 kids. But, so she had to supplement it, you know, by working. So, the other side, oh, my little grandfather, he was such a nice, happy-go-lucky guy. It's also, you know, Orthodox, but softer in a way. And to give you an example, I should have told you that grandmother I was showing, Esther, she would do things like I would come and stay over, and she made up with me. She would hide on the top of her refrigerator. She had a pitcher and some glasses, and and she turned the glasses upside down. And under it, she would put in a dime. And on Saturday, she would tell my grandfather that I went to visit some friends, but actually I went to the movies. But she would put that money there before she lit the candles, so that I could do that. I never forgot that she did that a number of times. And he never knew. He went along with it.
So what was Esther's husband's name, that grandfather?
Oh, Jacob.
Jacob. So
Jacob.
Esther and Jacob.
Yeah,
And
Esther
on the
and Jacob.
Other side, it's...
On the other side, there was Elia, and Sarah. Sarah. That's interesting, too, because my grandmother's name was Deborah. And when my father wanted to marry my mother, because there's a little tradition or whatever, law, actually it might even be a law, my grandmother dropped her Deborah and was Sarah. Because there's a law that you can't marry a woman who has your mother's name. Because in the throes of passion, you might call out and think of your mother. What is she like? Anyway, so then we come to that side. Only the warmth and the joy that I got there, no matter what, that I'd see her week after week. But every week when I rang the doorbell and they opened the door, it was like they got a visit from the president, Goldie, Goldie, Goldie. And both grandmothers always made food that I liked, especially for me. Esther used to be a good baker and all, but she knew I loved chocolate donuts. She'd get up before I got up in the morning and go to the bakery and come back, so when I woke up I had chocolate donuts.
So was Sarah the grandmother that you got choked up over?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. She lived the longest of my grandparents, and I always said whenever I would go to Europe to Dad, Grandpa, she would say, kiss me and say, who knows if I'll see you again. I said, don't be silly, of course you will. Well, 2 times it worked. Third time it didn't. It was so, it just, and the reason I didn't know was because she couldn't write. I would write her letters, so I wasn't suspicious. We came home in October, and she had died in August. And my parents knew how I'd feel. It just happened the day that we came home was the day a cousin of mine was getting married. And when I spoke to my father on the phone, he reminded me that you may not be sad at somebody's simcha, that I have to control myself and hold it privately. Because I knew when I'd see him, I would break down. And he came a little later because he had to go to say that memorial prayer. It was in Brooklyn. Of course, at that time, my parents lived in the Bronx. But I remembered what my father said, and I just swallowed a lot. And it just was very difficult for me.
What did each one die of?
It was always the heart. It was, they were in their 70s, except for my grandfather, my mother's father, lived till 88. But it was always something with the heart, in their case. Actually, no, my father's father had Parkinson's. I'm sure that contributed to it. Well, you know what? If you like stories, and in speaking about, there's a famous true story about my aunt, my grandmother Sarah, who I said people came right from the boat to her house. Well, this wasn't one of those. It was a friend of theirs that also had lived in the village, and it was Hanukkah time. And it was that long ago that my 2 aunts, her daughters, Molly and Yetta, weren't even married yet. So there they are peeling potatoes, and she's making potato pancakes, latkes. And in comes this village friend of theirs, okay. And he sits down just to talk. He came socially. And there was a plate with potato pancakes. And my grandma said, "Okay, help yourself." So he did. And he ate, and he ate. It was a huge pot. Because remember, she was cooking for the whole family. So that she quietly said to the girls, "Go down and get another 10 pounds of potatoes." She kept making them. He kept eating them. She was like there was no tomorrow. But she didn't want to embarrass him. Finally, he stopped. They just about had enough for themselves. But that's a famous story, true story about that particular grandmother, My other grandmother was a very good woman, very good woman. She wasn't a happy woman. She was very sensitive. And in the year before she died, once she was visiting us in Brooklyn, she lay down on the bed to have a little nap. And my mother's friend came in, and this grandmother thought she heard my mother say something unkind about her, which my mother never would have dared to do. Anyway, she picked herself up and she went out, and she didn't talk to my mother for about 3 months. She was fine with me. I went to visit her, but she was that highly offended. But at least she did finally come around, so that the last few months of her life, she was with my mother. She was very, very sensitive. My mother and father weren't married very long. Something they did offended her. So when they went to visit her, the door was locked, and outside the door was their wedding picture. And that was the way she let them know they were not welcome. But things like that happened with each one of her children. She was just a very sensitive person. Good person, kind person. She was the kind of a mother that would leave food for my grandfather and walk to the train, the subway, take the subway down every day to Brooklyn. They lived in Manhattan. To Brooklyn to babysit with my cousin while my uncle and his wife went to work, and then come back every night to take care of her husband, and the next morning to go out there. I mean, was a very kind lady, but she was very sensitive, and she was very good to me. She's the lady that put the dime under the glasses. My grandmother Esther, though, was responsible for many a winter coat for me that she would give my mother money to give me. But they always made me feel good about myself. They always made me feel how proud they were of everything I did. Well,
How would you describe the difference in your grandparents' physical homes?
okay, it's interesting because my father's parents, there were lots of plants. My grandmother had maybe a green thumb, they didn't have a lot of money, but they had a rubber tree plant that was huge. I remember they used to keep it on the fire escape and when the weather was nice. And when I was small enough, I would sit underneath it.
So they lived in a typical New York apartment.
Yeah, it was a tenement, Coldwater Flat. They both of them lived in Cold until the projects were put up, the housing projects, and then they both got apartments there. They only lived 4 blocks from each other, which made it simpler for us to go from one to the other. Usually we'd go to my mother's parents first, and then to my father's parents. Once in a while, my mother would object, and there was a reason too, because it was more joyful in my father's, house. So my grandmother had a lot of plants, and the one thing that both sets had, they may not have had a lot of art, but they had a picture of Roosevelt. That's one thing they both did. Somehow to them he was a savior or something, but they did have a photograph of him, both of them. And my other grandmother, she had a picture of a windmill, not too much art, but it was more stark because it was easier to keep clean. The other one had clutter. That grandmother was willing to make a feast like you did yesterday, and it was perfectly all right with her to wait, go to bed, get up in the morning and do the dishes. Oh yeah, that didn't bother her. But the other one believed in eating herself first. She felt if she was satisfied, she could feed everybody else. So she did not sit down to eat with us.
So she was butlering.
Yeah.
So your mother's mother was the one who was very clean?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, she really was very clean. Yeah.
So your mother came by it?
But it was also, there was something stark about it. Everything was neat but stark. The other house showed evidence of something going on,
Did either set of grandparents have any pets?
Oh no, because you weren't allowed to. In those years, you were not permitted to have pets in a city project.
Do you still remember the addresses? Or
Where they
lived, or at least the streets? Would you be able to find it?
Yeah, they were called the Vladeck, Vladeck, whoever he was, the Vladeck houses. That's where they lived. But I remembered that, before that, the cold water flat, because
What
we
does
lived
that
in the
mean,
same.
a cold water flat? You
A
couldn't get
cold-
hot water?
You have to boil it up. My mother had a cold stove. We lived in that building. My grandmother and my father's parents were on the third floor. When my parents first got married, they lived in East New York, in Brooklyn. They lived in my aunt's house, but then times got rough. That started, I was born in 28, and the Depression was in 29. And so we moved into another apartment and shared it with a cousin of my cousin and his wife. I don't know how long we lived there, but that's where Morty was born. But then it got even more difficult, so we moved down to New York, the Lower East Side, in what I call the cold water flat. There was the toilet was in the hall.
Shared with all the other people?
Just the person across. But my mother certainly didn't depend on that. My mother, was out there with the Lysol and all, and she hung curtains in the window. It was sparkled. She didn't care about the other family, whatever that was really. So imagine two families sharing one toilet. Cold water, a cold stove in the center of the kitchen that kept us warm. And a big tub with a porcelain cover. When you took that off, you could take a bath in that. Then they put the porcelain cover on. That's where you had your dishes. The line hanging out the clothes, you'd wash by hand. It was,
I mean,
and
from
when I
one
think
building
of
to
the
the other,
fact my
yeah.
mother in her 20s and 30s, I forget, we only lived there for 2 years because then we were accepted in a project in Brooklyn. It was one of the first they built, and so they did a lot of nice things there. After that, things were made cheaper, but it's all electric. It was quite a thing for us. I still remember as a child, it was a holiday, a Jewish holiday, and my mother had my brother in the stroller in a little park. And she sent me home with the keys to get the mail. And I could read. And I saw in the upper side it said New York Housing Authority. I was so excited. I could still see myself running all the way back to my mother with the envelope. It said we were accepted. They were very careful. You had to have all kinds of recommendations, and you always had to report your income and whatnot. But we paid $40 a month rent for a beautiful apartment. Beautiful. They never were able to afford to make a project like that again. It was only 3 stories high, and every floor had a picture window in it. They had a room just to shake out your dust mops. They had to wash it and dry it downstairs, and you didn't have to put in a quarter. But so we were very happy with that. But for 2 years, they lived on the 5th floor, walk up, big stoop, in that, and because we had an ice box. And I can remember stories of in the middle of the night, somebody forgot to empty it out before they went to sleep, and the water all on the floor, So, but I never felt poor because everybody else around me was in the same boat. So,
So, on your mom's side, how many children were her siblings?
She had 5 siblings.
There were 6 in that family.
Yeah,
Can you name them?
sure.
Yeah.
The oldest was Molly, then came Fanny, then came Annie, then came Ben. Am I counting more? Abe and my mother.
She's a baby.
6 kids, yeah.
And then on your dad's side,
There was, Papa was the first, and then Sam, Izzy, Yetta, Molly.
the 4.
Yeah. No, 5. Papa, Sam, Izzy,
Yetta, Molly.
Yetta, and
Do you remember any particular dishes or meals that your grandparents would serve you?
There was always.
Tell me which
Yeah,
one.
It's interesting.
Which one?
Okay, now my mother's side, and they were really from Galicia, you know, Austria, Galicia. I want you to know, I don't know whoever ended up with it. My grandfather had a picture in uniform with the saber, and it was a full-size portrait. I don't know who ended up getting that, but it was a wonderful picture of him. And you'd never expect it because he was such an observant, you know, always wore the sisters and all that. But he had to serve, I guess, a certain amount of time in the service, and they did have that painting. But, so they had a different style of cooking. Theirs was more on the sweeter side, and my grandmother, Sarah, was more on the peppery side, you know, the peppery side. So I got different tastes. They gefilte fish tastes
So
different.
the Austrian side was more
Sweet. It was sweet, you wouldn't think. And that Polish side.
So do you remember any particular dishes that they would?
Dishes? Oh, they made wonderful, all kinds of dishes. They made chalupchis, stuffed cabbage, kasha vanishkin.
So that was your dad's side? No.
Both of them made
Both
it.
of them made it.
Both of them made them. Just that the flavoring was a little different. The kasha vanishkas tasted the same with both. They made my father's side. They made goose. Yeah. My great grandmother was very good. My great grandmother worked for a Polish count. She made so many, you know, cooking. She was his chief cook.
What was
So
the
they
name
were
of the
very
count?
good.
The name of the count?
I wish I did now, but it was in that village. He was the big shot
What
of
was
the
the
village.
village? Do you know the name of the village?
Oh yeah, Krashnik. Yeah, I know that.
In Poland.
How do you spell that?
Krashnik. And in fact, a while ago, the New York Times had a reporter that went to visit different synagogues in Europe. I just happened to open the paper that time. It was either the Times or the Wall Street Journal. And there's a picture of a synagogue in Krashnik. It had a round circle, stained glass circle with a Jewish star on it.
Why don't you hold the thought here? Oh. Okay.
And the article said that it was being used by drug dealers now. You know, I don't think there were any Jews left there. And it was one of those villages where they took the tombstones and put them on, you know, the street too. But it said it was the tallest building in the village. And for me, the thrill was to look at that and think of my uncles and my grandfather and my father going to shul in that particular, you know, synagogue. Yeah. Oh, I knew Italian.
So
No, my dad's
Oh.
Polish, but it was
Okay,
one of
all right.
those things. During the period they lived there, it was by Russia, but it was Poland. But Russia had taken over that territory.
So your mom was Austrian,
My mother was born in the United States.
but her ethnic
Yeah, ethnic
background.
was Austrian, definitely Austrian, from Galicia. I know, but they never really spoke about it. I know that they did go through pogroms. My
Okay,
father.
yeah.
My father did, yeah. I never heard anything. I wasn't smart enough to interview my grandparents, to ask them, you know, for their memories of it. I know that my grandfather, Fuchs, was in the Russian army. He was conscripted in Russian army. And they loved him because he polished their boots very well, you know. Also, he would march with them, but he didn't know any Russian, but he would just sing the melodies, you know, la, la, and they loved him. He was very lovable. He was a very lovable, everybody loved him. Everybody loved my grandfather because Even his nieces and nephews were very kind to him. The first television they had was bought by a nephew for them. Oh yeah, they loved my grandfather because he was a nice guy, and she was the boss. Whatever, when he would come home with the money he made, he'd give it directly to my grandmother, and she was in charge.
Secret to a happy marriage.
She, as a matter of fact, the doctor said she was responsible for extending his life 5 years because of the way she took care of him. And I tried to understand, you know, when it was her time, because she said, I'm tired, and I really want to go to Grandpa. You know, I didn't mean to be selfish, but
Where are they all buried?
actually, my father's parents are buried in Long Island, right by the expressway there. I forget the name of the cemetery now. No, wait a minute. Yeah, that's where they're buried.
That's not Woodlawn, is it?
No, it's, I can't think of it right now. My mother's parents are buried in, also Belmore. No, Belmore. The difference is on the area where my mother's parents are buried, the men were not buried with the women. Men are in one, it's the same, the men are here, the women are there. Whereas in the other, my grandmother and grandmother are buried next to each other. In fact, my great-grandmother is also buried in that cemetery just a little bit a ways. So when I went to visit that grandmother's grave, I had a tough time because when she died, the tombstone was all in Hebrew, you know, not the English name. But I finally figured it out and found it. And he was on the other side. He had his English name, but of course somebody else was responsible for putting it up, you know.
So what was your mother's maiden name?
Oldman, which means old man.
And if one were to try to find the tombstones, you said they're in Hebrew. How would the name be different?
Well, hers would say Esther Altman, but it would be spelled in now I could
Lamed Mem.
understand it better, you know, it would be in Yiddish or,
Okay.
you know. But his probably says Jacob Altman.
Okay. In
I'm
English.
sure it says Jacob Altman. But he died many years later. He had 2 wives after her. So, because the tradition is to get a man to get married after 30 days. And they want them to get married. That was to discourage promiscuity, you know. So they want them to get married. They don't want them to live alone. And he, as I said, he outlived the second wife, not the third. And
Now, how come your dad didn't marry? How come your dad didn't marry after your mother?
he told me that the problem was that he felt that he didn't have a lot of money. He was living on Social Security. And when you marry somebody else, especially if there are children, he felt there could be problems. He said, Goldie, my luck, if I get married, I have 1 good year and then she gets sick. I had enough taking care of your mother. So he never got married again.
So I'm sorry to keep going back to the same question, but with Eli and Esther, what would their tombstones look like? Would the last name Fuchs be translated
Oh, yes.
into Hebrew?
No. It actually says Fuchs. It has it both in Hebrew, both in Yiddish and in.
Okay.
I say Yiddish because it's Elia, and she's Sarah. But Hebrew, there's a lot of Hebrew in Yiddish, so you know.
Okay.
But they would say it. And my mother's tombstone says Dorothy Fuchs.
Of all your parents' siblings, did you have a favorite?
Oh yeah. I mean, I love them all. They're all wonderful. I feel uncomfortable to say that, but Aunt Molly, no question, on the one side. On the other side, I I don't know. I love them all, but if I had to pick, maybe the other Aunt Molly,
Oh.
because she was a character. But I really loved them all.
Was Molly their real name, or was that a nickname?
No, Molly.
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 Hmm.
Obviously, for different people, different families, but they were just, their names happened to be Molly. Molly, my father's sister, I wanted to be like my Aunt Molly. Interesting, because of the way she ran her house, the way her mother did. You never went to Aunt Molly without somebody being there, being nurtured in some way.
Now, she was the Aunt Molly that gave us the
Yes.
cabbage recipe. Yeah.
Yeah. That was the Aunt Molly.
Mm.
It's sad, though, when she got sick, a lot of those people fell by the wayside because that's okay. And
Why?
that's Lila's mother. What?
Why would you say she was your favorite?
Because she had qualities that I wanted to be like. I wanted to have a house open that people would enjoy coming to visit. She laughed, she was happy. She was devoted to her husband and children. She was pretty, but it really was, also she was a wonderful cook and baker. Wonderful. And I just loved
She had a
her.
generous
That, it's not that
nature.
Yetta was like that too. I got to see Molly more. And she was just kind, and I just love my Aunt Molly. And people say, even her grandchildren say, that that's why they like to see me, because somehow the look reminds them of their grandmother, because they were very close.
When you look at your grandparents,
Yes.
do you see any traits in them that are in you?
I like to think that my house is open, and if not physically coming to the house, certainly the phone is, and people are always, calling me up, and I get a lot of, "You're just like my mother. You're like my mother." Even Tilly, who's only maybe 6 months younger than I am, says, "I hope you understand when I say you're my second mother." I do understand, but I'm getting a lot of that. And when I was in the show Fiddler on the Roof, years afterward, if I meet anybody from the cast, they'd call me Mama. So I kind of hope that that quality I saw in my Aunt Molly and in my grandmother and, my Aunt Yetta, that I had some of that. I wanted to be like that. I want to be there for people. And there were so many needy people. And the famous quote from my friend Kitty was, Gloria, when I look at some of the friends you have, I wonder about myself. I've never forgotten it. I wonder about myself. And she also was very happy when I call her. I mean, I think that comes from the family, from the influence of my family, the traits. But I don't think I am temperamental in thinking about the other side. And although I credit that grandfather, my mother's father, with instilling in me the love for my faith and the commitment, something about the way I saw the way he felt about it got deep into my soul as a very young child, and I think it's always been there, and I'm grateful to him for that. I mean, he certainly would not have approved of the role I played today, because he was of the traditional ilk that women, But, sometimes people change when they're older. I know my father certainly did, to an extent. If you don't bend, you break.
Do some of those?
Well, my concern is that you'll run out of film, and this will be a 3-hour thing. Nobody's going to want to sit through 3 hours of this, you know.